We are now heading to the front lines to really determine what's going on, what can be done, and how we can move forward and lead together in these historic times. We're going to say hello to a friend of mine named Greg Schinkel. Greg is the president of a company, North American-wide company called Frontline Leadership. And just checking his bio before we went on this morning, over 500,000 people, Greg, have benefited from your trainings and videos over the last 20 years or so. Is that the number? Over 500,000?
Yeah, because when you look at all the different ways that we can reach people, whether it's through our publishing or our training programs that our team delivers, yeah, we're very fortunate. Of course, it helps to be having done it for 28 years. So yeah.
Lot to be said for longevity, lots of experience, Greg, and just, in a nutshell, I know that frontline leadership is not just you. You've got other facilitators and you work with large corporations and small companies, but essentially it's to equip frontline supervisors with what, Greg? The soft skills needed to move forward and put out all kinds of unnecessary HR fires. Is that my
Right.
understanding of it?
If you think about it, Gare, the frontline people are the ones that manage most of the employees or team members in any organization. So if you just work on the executive level or the management level, you're really missing out on the people that interact with most of the team members in the organization. They actually help define the culture. So what we decided is, and this goes back to my father who started the company, is our calling is to see if we can make it so no one can say they had a bad boss. And that is a very high calling. So we know that those frontline supervisors interact with those folks. So from a communication, motivation, conflict resolution, problem solving, we equip them with the tools that they need to be successful.
Now we can already surmise, and we can make a pretty educated guess that everything that's happening on the front line right now in companies everywhere across North America is not the same it was before the pandemic. And so consequently, Greg, before we get to that, I just want to set it up. This is part of the setup, because what we do on these Zoomcasts is make sure they are unedited, unscripted. So for the record, Greg Schinkel has this love of baseball and the Chicago Cubs in particular. And for some reason, he's been able to sustain and build a very healthy family and marriage with Robin for more than 30 years. Is that correct, Greg? I mean,
For sure.
these are the things, but you've had so many accomplishments. You're a private pilot, you're in the front lines, and now here we're at this stage in history. Everything is in upheaval. What are you noticing right now about the shifting tides of what's happening on the front lines and what people need to know?
Well, keep in mind that there's actually two things happening to the guys who are leading at the front line. Either their organization is going gangbusters, and we've got some customers that, fortunately are in the business of selling toilet paper and food products, and they're booming. They can barely keep up with production. So that kind of stress is different because you're technically busy, your company's not downsizing, but you've got this stress of knowing what's going on in the real world, and your employees are probably feeling that pressure and that uncertainty in their households. So it is this, you're in this, I don't know, they call it the crucible of pressure as a leader trying to make things happen. On the other extreme, of course, would be the leaders where their business is slowed down, at least for the time being. From a production standpoint, they're facing a different kind of stress. And I'd say, and you and I both agree, that you can have the good stress or the bad stress, but either way, it still stresses out your body. So we find that the leader's biggest thing that they have to work on is their own confidence level, because it's so easy to have your confidence taken down by uncertainty.
Now that's interesting. And that, I think, is going to be a great thread. And again, like I said earlier, Greg, he's based here in London, Ontario, but works all over the continent. And he's been there nearly 30 years on the front lines and working, if we were to create an archetype, this is what we're looking at. And when you say confidence, explore that a little bit deeper, Greg, because I think you just tickled a nerve there.
Yeah. Well, and of course, having watched the Last Dance, where Michael Jordan was going through his sixth title, that's on Netflix these days and ESPN, is confidence is something that when you start to lose it, it really jeopardizes your effectiveness. And if you think about how do people get confident, they get confident by putting themselves in different situations and then ultimately prevailing or winning. So the problem right now is supervisors at the front line, leaders at the front line, or quite frankly, leaders at any level could have their confidence whacked down because they don't feel like they're winning. They're working really hard, but they're just not notching the wins like they used to when times were, quote, normal. And so to protect your confidence as a leader means that you have to narrow down your scope so that you can still have that sense of winning, even amongst the confusion and the uncertainty.
Is there a way you can kind of give a specific example of how a situation would play out like that?
Yeah. So, for example, if you're worried about long-term concerns about the viability of your company or your team, and there might be restructuring, the problem with all of that from a confidence and resilience standpoint is you're too much focused on the future that you can't control. So, in order to keep your winning mindset, you have to look at what you're accomplishing over the next 24 hours. If you look at the 24 hours, what did we get done? And what is the trend? Because the problem right now when we're in uncertainty is the trend could be feeling like it's going down instead of going up, potentially in terms of getting better. So as soon as you start to see any inclination that you're making headway, guys, we made our production targets today. Good news, we didn't have any orders last week, but we've got we got at least a few orders this week. So anything you can do to hook on to the positive momentum helps you retain your confidence as a leader. Once you've lost your confidence, that uncertainty is going to spread through your team, and it's going to create even more anxiety for yourself and for them.
That's interesting. In all these Zoom casts that we're doing, Greg, we're noticing a familiar theme is that somehow business leaders everywhere, whether it's CEOs, entrepreneurs, frontline supervisors, business leadership now has to kind of shut off what's happening in the news media. And what I'm hearing you say is positive breeds more positive, which breeds more confidence. Is that it?
Yes, but remember, we're talking about a calm sense of confidence, not necessarily a false sense of optimism. And there's a difference there. Perseverance is better than optimism. If you think of the people who you trust, it isn't the people that tell you that everything's going to be fine in 90 days. That's not what you want to hear because that may not be true. So we're not looking for predictions of exactly when and where things are going to happen. What we're interested in people who say that we're going to persist and we're going to prevail. Winston Churchill back in World War II, and I know it's often quoted at times like this. It's like there are dark days ahead, but we will prevail. These will be our finest hours. And I think, Queen Elizabeth tried to channel that. Queen Elizabeth II tried to channel that in her message a couple of weeks ago, is we've got to stick to this because there is no other option. And you've got to just persist through it until you see the success. But leaders can get down on themselves like anything else. We've come through a period of I'm not saying it was truly successful for everybody. Well, we came through a period where things were going pretty well. And all of a sudden, the rug gets pulled out from under you as a leader, and it just affects your confidence level. So anything you can do through that positive and build on positives, I think will help not only you, but it helps your team as well.
I'm just curious, and without betraying any confidence, or maybe you feel comfortable sharing. Do you have a client story, like in the last 30 days, that you're really proud of something that's happened where those ideals have been demonstrated and lived?
Well, we have two specific situations that come to mind. One is with a big consumer products company that at least part of their enterprise is doing just amazingly well because of what they produce. And what we've seen there is the guys have really stepped up. And if anything, because it's almost now a calling, that is, we have this purpose in life, which is to make sure that people have the goods that they need to buy. So instead of just going through the drudgery of making product every day, we are helping people live better lives in this uncertainty. This is the stability they're looking for. They need to see our products on the shelf. We're helping people out with that. So that's one story that came to mind. Similarly, a company that's in the baked goods business, a large company with about 3,000 team members, again, they're going flat out in terms of producing product. But what I've noticed is that there's this greater sense of purpose. We've always known it's important to start with why, to use Simon Sinek. But now you actually, for some companies, or actually, you could probably argue that most companies have maybe a distilling down to what their core purpose is. And when you know that you're helping feed people and bringing them comfort. So I've just noticed that the leaders are willing to deliver these messages of hope to their own team so that the team says, yeah, we're doing something here that's pretty important. We need to keep doing it. And I think if organizations, if frontline leaders could have that sense of purpose, not just in crisis times, but in good times as well, I think they'd make a bigger difference on their teams and on the world at large.
That's so well said, Greg. I can't help but also, before we wrap this up, just share, and I'd love to hear you share your thoughts on it. I've never felt so much respect for people, or, working on the front lines. We know about the healthcare workers, the grocery store clerks, the truck drivers, I've got a sister flying with Air Canada still. Your thoughts on what supervisors and leaders need to know about managing folks who right now are doing, sometimes double shifts 8 days a week?
Oh, for sure. So, first of all, as you pointed out, it's these frontline workers that are shining right now. If everyone's caring about them, loving them, showing them the attention that they deserve. If you're the frontline supervisor or team leader of those folks, you're still dealing with the reality that they're human beings. And what we're seeing is that in some cases, because they're human beings, they have worries and anxieties. They've got these pressures for their own health and safety in some cases. It's important as the leader that you have that empathy and that you realize that in some cases productivity may not be exactly what it would be in normal times. And it's not that you have to let down your accountability, because we still need people to deliver on their jobs now more than ever. But I think it's having that blend of compassion and encouragement. And of course, there's probably no shortage of praise that you could heap on your staff, in some cases just for showing up for work, and being there for people. I just think that's something that the frontline leader can always do, but especially now, recognize that these are human beings doing things that they could easily just be staying at home, but they're needed. The work that they do is needed. And so I think we have to celebrate them as leaders as well.
Greg, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on this Zoomcast. Frontline leadership. Any final thoughts? You're pretty easy to get a hold of. I just want people to be able to reach out to you, and anyone who's watching.
Right. So our website is uniquedevelopment.com. And probably like most people in our industry, we're looking at innovating a couple of things. We know that live training on site is going to be something that's a bit of a challenge for some organizations, perhaps for many months to go. And so now we've got a whole lot of virtual and remote delivery options and ways of nourishing and building up the frontline leaders. So people can reach me at uniquedevelopment.com.
Greg Schinkel, our guest today on this conversation, leadership conversations about moving small business forward. And I just want to share this quick thought, because Greg referenced Winston Churchill. I've never in my lifetime heard Churchill being referenced more than he has lately. But I also came across this quote from another British prime minister that I think is relevant to what Greg just talked about. Margaret Thatcher once said, "You may have to fight a battle more than once to win it." And I think that's what we're into right now. We're fighting these daily battles. We're going through different things that we've never experienced before, but somehow, in the words of both Greg Schinkel and Winston Churchill, we will prevail. We will find ways to lead together and eventually emerge stronger through these historic times.